I'm losing sleep over the idea of how poets tell stories. I'm thinking about this question, how poets tell stories, and what makes a writer, and more specifically, what makes a poet a poet. And somehow these two questions, these very imperfect questions, the dialectic of them, answer one another and perpetuate one another. I'm thinking of this tome, this 50-pound anthology that I erroneously brought with me on the subway today. 100 years of poetry in the New Yorker. So I'm thinking about the New Yorker as a sort of globally important magazine, that includes all these genres. It's obviously rigorous journalism, memoir, comics, fiction, was nonfiction and fiction, and poetry. So what is poetry? And it's storytelling, because this is what we're doing here tonight. I'm embodying poetry before you, and its paradox of storytelling. So what is poetry doing in this magazine that continues to be giving poetry a lot of real estate visually? I think of the first poem in the anthology that Kevin chose, which is the Adam Zagievsky poem to praise a mutilated world. You gathered acorns in the park in autumn, and leaves eddied over the earth's scars. Praise the mutilated world, and the gray feather a thrush lost, and the gentle light that strays, vanishes, and returns. I think about that poem, of course, was in the issue right after 9/11. And in retrospect, I read that poem in times like these, and I think, is there any other way to speak in moments like that, in moments of such uncertainty and fear? I've been writing poetry my whole life. I grew up in Vermont in a very troubled artistic coven of women. And when I often think about my childhood, I think about it as punctuated with beauty and burdock. Punctuated with beauty and burdock. When I think of the beauty of my childhood, I think of how I was lucky enough to be exposed to poetry from the get-go. And ironically, of course, poetry gives us access to be able to contain the burdock. I have one of my first poems right here. My berry. My berry is red. I have not ate it yet. But my brother ate it. Sometimes I do not like my brother. Take that, William Carlos Williams. Right, so it would be insane not to mention Ruth, my grandmother Ruth Stone, who I spent a lot of my childhood alone with, and reading her poems like My Berry. She would say, "Genius. Send it to the New Yorker." She'd be serious. She was taught me how to read and write. And yes, we read Stregonona and Frog and Toad, but we also read Poets Market, 1998 edition. And if any of you were sending out poems before the internet, you'd know that this was a big giant tome which listed in alphabetical order all the magazines that took poetry and how to send to them and what they required. So I would write my little blurbs about myself, and I'd put my little manuscripts together, and we would put together the self-addressed stamped envelopes, and that's how we played. And I don't think the New Yorker ever, well, it hadn't yet accepted my poetry. Um, all that is ad hominem. All that, though, is fun, but it's po biz. My grandma called it the po biz. And it should be considered fun play, all the sending out. The real work was me watching her and being able to see how one might praise a mutilated world. I was, like many of us are, just in the traumatizing event of being born, exposed to a lot of the mutilation of the world in many different ways, internally and externally. And it was really incredible to be able to see a poet and know them and love them in all the complicated, ordinary, tragic ways that one loves one's parents. And then to be able to have these poems, and to see the person and then to see the persona, the maker, the poet in the poems. Wild Asters by Ruth Stone. I am here to worship the blue asters that grow along the brook, not to carry pollen on my legs, nor rub strutted wings in mindless sucking, but to feel with my eyes the loss of you and me, not in the powdered mildew that spreads from leaf to leaf, but in the glorious absence of grief. To see what is not meant to be seen, the clusters, the aggregate, the undenying multiplicity. This idea of learning to feel with your eyes the glorious absence of grief. These are the paradoxes that the poet learns to wield in their storytelling. I knew I needed to leave Vermont and I needed to go out and learn how to feel with my eyes on my own. I was accepted into NYU for my MFA, and I arrived on the Amtrak train with a 1960s powder blue suitcase with silk pockets and a portable typewriter, and I swear to God, it was not precious. These were just the objects of my talented and deeply troubled antiquer family, and the objects given to one going out into the world. I moved in with my big sister Hillary, who's here tonight, and also went to NYU for her MFA. And I began the earnest work of building my library and scouring all the used bookstores of New York. And of course, went to the Strand and I found the early edition of the New Yorker Anthology of Poetry, and my grandmother was in there. And my grandfather was in there, who is totally unknown now because he died so young. That grief, the terrible absence of grief. So it was a special anthology to me. And I want to tell you a story. What's poetry like? Poets play the winter tarantella, making love in the midnight hours on a white iron bed like a dog skeleton, distinguishing the essential and unessential moment shared between ordinary lunatics, and screaming over a bird in an apple tree until an elegy has to be written to resuscitate the relation. Those who look toward the depleted wildlife of neighborhoods with tragic relish, to see somehow ourselves disappearing about ourselves. Once in New York City years ago, the internet technician finally arrived. His teenage apprentice stood in my living room over a Transtromer book, and he said it looked kind of cool. and he wanted to know what it was. Poetry, I said. What's poetry like? He asked. And the treacherous inadequacy with which one finds oneself, explaining in a few loose, deficient words something with lungs and no face, the immortal freak of language you haunt and hunt, which is the original state of language you're trying to get back to from within. Poetry, whose rare geniuses come as bittersweet suicidal explosions on the tongue, randomly felt during long, tedious meals, award-winning and already forgotten. All the emoting of the unanalyzable fragments, all the surrenders and detonations of precision and reckless insight and references to hidden wisdom and Coke cans and conversations across time and slips into truth, and obscurity of thought altogether blissful, the form itself at its best strings of dreams overlaid like unobserved clothing, the words that sing stillness, the silence craved by perpetual auctioneers, that which is not the tale of an event, but itself an event. You know what? I said, just take the book, pushing it into his hands. Thanks, he said, and took it away, grinning a little. But later, with snow in my head and a thunder in my right eyelid, I was worried, as I was so dangerously then, about dark yet unspoken things. It frightened me. That shiny black and white book, wafting around New York City in the back of a Time Warner cable van, waiting to be opened, waiting to torment him, thinking of it changing his life. So that's how a poet tells a story, um, in fragments, and it's like this unfolding of a story right here, right now, in front of you. It's real tragicomedy. I mean, it's a serious drama and a cosmic joke. I mean, just look at us. We're all scarred and masked and dangerous. I think what I love most about poetry is that it doesn't tell a story. It tears open a veil with its story, and it opens you up to the beauty and the burdock of being. Thank you all so much.